6 months ago, we discussed what was going to happen in Toronto real estate. In fact, we did see that play out basically exactly as planned. We saw active listings start climbing after a lull in November and December. For this video, let's break down what we're seeing right now on the ground level in Toronto real estate, and let's talk about what may happen here as we're heading into a Canadian election and going into, let's call it, the new spring market, because the weather hasn't exactly been spring-like, and we are starting to see that sun a little bit more than we have in the past. Before we jump into it, I'm Michael Ouzas. I'm a realtor here in the city of Toronto. If you ever wanted to book in a call to discuss your plans for the spring market in Toronto real estate, click on that first link in the description down below or scan the QR code here on the screen. A lot of the misconceptions for Toronto real estate is that when the media is talking about what's going on in the market, they use the greater Toronto area, which is basically from Burlington all the way as far east to Clarington and north to Innisfil. It's about 7 million people and at least 2 hours of a drive from the CN Tower, which we can call the pin of the city. If we're taking a look at the data, we're going to dive into Toronto proper today and also look at what exactly we've been seeing on the new listing sides for condos and for freehold properties and separate those two because they are two totally different markets right now. The other piece of the equation is what exactly has been selling and at what price point, and we'll break that down too when it comes to condos and freehold properties and what those numbers actually look like. In the last video, when we were talking about what's going to happen in the next 6 months, we're basically showing how every December we see a low new listing volume. And that was definitely the case here as we saw December 2024 at one of the lowest listing volume months that we have seen. Now, what's interesting is as we've gone along here into the quote unquote spring market, I actually thought we would get a slew of listings after March break, and it never really amounted to that. We did see properties come to market, but not exactly in that freehold space. If we look at March here, basically things went up to here, 6,700 active listings. And if we solve for March here, we did see about 6,700 new listings come to market. And in April, that number to date, which we're on April 25th is the last piece of this data, we're at about 6,000 listings, which is down from March. And that makes sense, about 1,000 listings less. There's a lot of things going on in April this year. We had Easter, which is a long weekend, and generally people don't list right before the long weekend. And then we have an election coming up on the 28th. So I do believe that people were holding back their listings this past week and will be launching after the election next week. Overall, though, pretty consistent across the board when it comes to new listing volumes. Now, if we look back to 2020, we saw that number climb dramatically, basically from April 2020 to give or take September 2020. And then things fell off quite a bit of new listings as we went through the year. Now, when we talk about what could happen in the next 6 months, I believe we're going to see a similar process here as we go through. Maybe April will be a little bit low, but we may see some climbing in May, which was just like last year. We saw May was the highest new listings month of the year. I do feel we're going to get the same kind of output here in 2025. But then as we go through the summer, if people haven't already come to market, they may not actually come to market at all. They may just wait for either if they're in a condo, they may wait for some better condo prices, or if they're in a house and they don't really feel the need to move, they may just hold off and we may see a drop, a new listing, just like we did last year, basically May through the end of the summer. And then we saw a bit of a spike here in September, but really not a ton after that. I do feel we will get a very similar next 6 months here in 2025. Now, if we take a look at the number of active listings, and yes, there are a good amount of active listings on the market. In January 2024, 5,100 active listings. December 2024, 6,200 active listings. We've seen that number continue to climb here into March. And this data actually hasn't populated yet for April, but even in March, we saw 9,500 active listings. We saw the highest number in September at 10,100. So we'll see if this continues through April, which we are seeing some pretty high levels of inventory right now. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly does that look like from condos to freehold properties? We can solve for that. Let's take a look at condo apartments here. And overall, out of those active listings, 5,500 are condos. And that's a big portion of what is the active listings on the market today. And if we take a look at, let's add in detached and semi and townhouses, essentially you're looking around 2,800 active listings. So for the entire freehold market, there's about half of the amount of inventory that we are seeing in the city of Toronto compared to what we're seeing for condos as a whole. So just around 6,000 active listings for condos and about 3,000 active listings for freehold properties. As mentioned at the start of the video, we talk about what properties are selling and what price points. And here's a really good look at what we've seen since January 1st, 2025 through the middle of April 2025. Essentially pretty even across the board, and we will solve for condos and for freehold properties. But Toronto as a whole overall has been about 6,156 sales, and half of them have been condos, about 48.65%, and detached 28%, semis 10%. Condo townhouses and row houses, of course, make up the difference. What we've been seeing here is kind of a mix of price points, and generally these lower prices would be condos, and then the higher prices would be freeholds with a mix of condos as well. If we take a look at condos only, you could see that that property price point of 500 to 600,000 is definitely leading the way, and then 600 to 700,000 is next in line. So most of the condos that I've been selling have been basically from 400,000 to 800,000 as a whole. That's a big chunk of sales. Now, interestingly enough, we are still seeing condos sell over the $1 million mark in all price points, even 45 sales above the $2 million mark. So that's quite a number for larger condos in the city of Toronto, still selling even today. Now, if we take a look at the freehold sector and we look at detached, semis, and towns/rows, you can see not a ton of properties selling basically below that 800,000 mark, or in that 700 to 799, there was 50 sales. But taking a look here, most of the sales have happened in the city of Toronto between that 1 million and 1.5 range. And that makes a ton of sense. That is the most competitive market in the city of Toronto. And it kind of probably always will be that sector of the market where if you do have a condo and you're looking to make a jump to a house, that's usually that price point. Or if you're just going for your first property, that's usually where that first purchase comes into play. And detached, 67% of those, semis 25%, and attached 7.37. Now, what's always interesting is if we just take a look at semis as a whole, they are making up a bulk of that price point between 1 to 1.5 million. And if we look at detached, it's kind of a mix all across the board, with the most sales happening either between 1 million, 1.25. And I will say, with the Toronto address, that property will most likely be needing a pretty good amount of work if it's detached and it's a good size lot. And then most of those sales happening over that 2 million mark, 410 sales across the board. Let's summarize what may happen over the next 6 months. The election will be out of the way. We will start to hopefully see some stability coming from down south, and interest rates have been kind of holding tight as of late. We haven't seen too much going up and down in that front as well. If everything just kind of remains status quo and we start to see that stability, we may start to see more momentum in the market when it comes to sales. We've been seeing active listings continue to climb, and I do think we're going to get even more inventory here after the election happens, but that inventory may be somewhat limited because if those sellers have been working to come to market, they may all come to market kind of at the same time, and then we might see a lull going into summer, which we typically do. Now, the weather is getting better, and that may help the quote-unquote later spring market this year, heading into May and possibly even into June. But I wouldn't expect a ton of listings coming up after the end of May and into June. So what does that mean if you're a buyer? If you're a buyer and looking to get into the market, having your ducks in a row and being ready for those properties as they do come up in the spring market should give you a good advantage over buyers that are just getting their process started. And if you've already been seeing properties along the way and you narrow down your location, property type, and your budget, that could be a successful strategy going into the spring market here into May. If you're a seller looking to get on the market, I can't stress this enough. You do have to look the best, have everything fixed, and really stand out when it comes to marketing and presentation. And I've actually created 2 videos, one for sellers, one for buyers, that break down getting those ducks in a row on both sides. If you have any questions or wanted to discuss your strategy for Toronto real estate, scan that QR code. I'm Michael Ouzas. Thanks for watching.